let's move on. Now, for more on this, we're now being joined live by Eugene Craig from Washington, D.C. He is the former Vice Chair, Maryland Republican Party, Chair of Black Republicans for Harris, and a political analyst. Mr. Craig, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Having me.
All right, now, Mr. Craig, let's get right into it. I was actually listening to one of your previous discussions where you said that Black Republicans for Harris will be the margin of victory. As we know right now, it's a neck-and-neck race. You lead this movement of Black Republicans for Harris. I'm emphasizing this. Talk to us about this. What's your opinion at this point?
Well, look, I think it's a couple things. First and foremost, we as Black Republicans for Harris, we as Republicans for Harris are at this point in juncture putting our country over our party. Donald Trump cannot be elected again. Donald Trump cannot be allowed to get back into the White House and the levers of power of government. And so we're doing everything in our power to do that. And a big part of that is making sure that Black Republicans are, one, showing up, and two, we're crossing over, and we'll help build that margin of victory for Vice President Harris tomorrow night so Donald Trump can get up and claim victory in a close election.
Mr. Craig, certain predictions are suggesting that Trump is indeed leading in all 7 swing states. Would you see such predictions with a certain sense of caution at this point? What would you suggest?
Well, I actually think that it's actually the opposite, that Vice President Harris is leading in all 7 swing states. Whether you look at the early vote data, whether you look at the polls. Now, I will say this, some of the polls are skewed in Trump's favor. But that's just because, the pollsters are terrified of getting it wrong, so they're overcompensating with his voters when they're polling. But, for example, right, a lot of the polls that came out of Pennsylvania last month have Black voters going to Trump at 25%. And, I mean, anybody that's ever worked in politics or as a Black voter would say that's just preposterous, just not going to happen, right? But those polls have him either at 1 point or tied. So when you properly account for the proper weighing of Black voters, Hispanic voters, the way they should be represented in these polls, she's probably up minimally 3 or 4 points. But the way I look at it is this. The early voting data across swing states, now we can throw Iowa, it used to be a swing state, but now it's probably more solidly red the last couple of years, is showing that, she's up. She's up in Georgia, she's up in North Carolina, she's up in Pennsylvania, she's up in Wisconsin, she's up in Michigan, in Nevada, and Arizona. And I think, David Plouffe, a couple minutes ago, her campaign manager, actually came out and said publicly that I think they could sweep all 7 swing states. But that's something I believe, and I've been seeing in the data for a while now.
All right, Mr. Craig, that's the swing states. Let's talk about Maryland in particular. Of course, it has 10 electoral votes. It's voting for the presidential seat, of course, voting for the state's 8 congressional districts, 2 Senate races. Early voting, it's already crossed the 1.6 million mark. And, in Maryland, it's primarily been referred to as a blue state. Joe Biden won the state with 33.2-point margin, with landslide wins for Republicans coming in Maryland only perhaps in 1972, 84, and 88. That was Reagan, Nixon, if I'm getting that right. What is your assessment of the political landscape in 2024?
Well, I'll say this. I think she's going to probably beat Trump by 32 points or more. I think that her, huge landslide in Maryland is going to help Angela Alsobrooks and also April Delaney running down in Maryland's 6th congressional district, which then, helps the Democrats with their majority both in the House and Senate. But, that's just what it is. In Maryland, Democrats outnumber Republican 2-1. And, Governor Hogan was a very popular governor. But, it's going to be virtually impossible for the top of the ticket to be decided by 30-plus points. And then somehow, some way, the governor becomes like Goku, the Hulk, and Superman all at once and defies that, margin of victory at the Senate level. So I think, Vice President Harris is going to sweep Maryland. She's going to sweep Maryland and help, carry Angela Alsobrooks and April Delaney into Congress with her.
Mr. Craig, I am absolutely clear on your stance. You're giving all 7 swing states to Harris. You're totally backing her. That's clear. At this point, when it comes to economy, immigration, abortion, if you were to look at it as someone who's not affiliated or assigned to any one party as an outsider, would you give any of these criteria to Trump where you feel he's stronger than Harris at this point?
No, because look at the way you look at it as this, right? On the economy, Donald Trump wrecked our economy by being ill prepared for COVID, and then even when COVID was here, doing everything possible to not actually deal with the problem.
But Mr. Craig, was anyone prepared for COVID at this point? I'm sorry, I'm butting in.
Yes. Actually, the Obama White House had the national security team had a pandemic epidemic team and plan in place. Donald Trump literally trashed it on day one. So there was preparedness. There was preparedness that was there that could have helped us not lose a million lives. A couple million more that have permanent health situations, and then the economic damage that was done. But most importantly, right, if you look at what's going on currently in the economy, especially around inflation, prices on everything is down. Gas, the big marker for everything economy-wise, is under $3 a gallon average across the nation. It's been like that for 6 months almost. On the topic of immigration, Donald Trump told us when he got elected he was going to build the wall. Mexico was going to pay for it. But what we actually saw was that the wall didn't get built. Mexico didn't pay for it. And he actually didn't deal with immigration. But Vice President Harris, President-elect Harris, is vowing to actually deal with our actual immigration issues, not just, demonize, brown people that, look different than white people. On the topic of back to the topic of the economy, also you have to keep in mind that we have record number of positive job growth in the last 3.5 years under Biden Harris, especially when it comes to black men. We have historic low numbers of black male unemployment, which is a direct result of the Biden Harris policies.
Right, Mr. Craig, I'm just going to take it further from what my colleague said as well. We do know economy, abortion, immigration. These are the key voter concerns. We know abortion particularly, that's been the centerpiece of Kamala Harris's campaign. Now, I want to talk about some of the ballot questions for Maryland, which has thrown up some concerns, in particular abortion. Yeah. Now, Maryland votes will decide if abortion rights should be put into the state's constitution. However, it's the wording of the ballot that has raised some concerns, as it does not mention the word abortion. Reproductive freedom perhaps, but not abortion. Now, my question is, do you think at this point we're just quibbling over semantics, or is there something to it?
I think it's quibbling over semantics. Some of the hard right in Maryland that are opposing it, they never, have straight up, arguments or conversation about what actually is taking place. They try to find some weird, possible, hypothetical angle instead of what it's actually about. Reproductive freedom largely deals around abortion, right? The understanding and the reason and rationale why this amendment's on the ballot is to codify, the right to reproductive freedom largely around abortion. And to the Constitution, the Maryland State Constitution, but let's also be very clear here too, is that reproductive freedom also does mean things like birth control. It does mean things like having access to maternal health, health care. Those all are encompassed upon reproductive freedom. But the right, although they're many of them claim to be pro-life, don't like to talk about what it actually means to be pro-life and what pro-life. And what it means to actually stand up for the right for people to actually have a right to health care.
Mr. Craig, let me just now take it from a global perspective here. And this is something that Trump has really ensured that he harps about it to the fullest, because his claim is that during his term there were no wars. Now, if I were to just juxtapose that to now, there are tensions in the Korean Peninsula, there are tensions in the South China Sea, there are of course the two wars which are ongoing and seeming to find no end, and West Asia tensions are only on the rise. Then you also have Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, who have come together, which is a bigger concern. There are US military assets all around West Asia at this point. Things have really peaked. Do you feel that goes against the Democratic camp, not necessarily Kamala Harris, but again, do you feel that goes in favor of Trump in this election?
Well, no, because the thing is this, right? The biggest war that's taken place for us is the war in Ukraine, and that's a direct result of Donald Trump's inaction, or Donald Trump wanted to appease Putin. or appease, North Korea, or insert despot or dictator here, right? Because Donald Trump, wanted, Ukraine to give him some dirt on Joe Biden and withheld actual support and arms to help prevent this war. We're now doing our best to make sure the Ukrainians have everything they need. When it comes to the South China Sea and Taiwan and Japan and making sure they have whatever they need to stem off a fight with China, Donald Trump always talked tough on China, but almost every Trump product is made in China. And so it's like, hey, he knows it's politically expedient with his base to say, oh, it's China, the China virus, or, China sitting fentanyl and this, that, and they're taking your jobs. But, he owns, multiple trademarks in China. He has almost everything exclusively made in China. And even his daughter has multiple trademarks that are held in China. And then when it comes to the Middle East, part of the provocation that we get here in the embodiment of Bibi Netanyahu is the relationship with Donald Trump. Part of the reason we haven't gotten a solution to the war in Gaza right now is because Netanyahu is doing everything possible to hope now for a Trump presidency to help pretty much give him the green light to do whatever he wants. So my thing is this, whether it's domestic policy or on the international stage, Donald Trump's not just bad for us, he's bad for everybody.
Mr. Craig, but, back in from 2016 to 2020, you had the U.S. president and the Russian leader, shaking hands. And that definitely means something better for the entire world. These two superpowers who are not at loggerheads as they are as of now. Don't you feel that is something that we really need at this point? And that goes in Trump's favor?
Well, I'll say this. I will say this, right? Vladimir Putin is former KGB, and if he's former KGB, he's always KGB. This is the same man who W said he looked in his eye and saw his soul. Mm-hmm. Russia being the other strongest nuclear power on the planet, we're always going to have communication, and hopefully we come to middle ground on things. But let's be very clear. The provocation that Russia's been doing in Eastern Europe, starting with Ukraine, and they're hoping that they could take it as far as Poland and other places, absolutely must be stood up to and absolutely must be stopped.
All right, Mr. Craig, I hear you, we hear you, and I would just like to take it further from what my colleague said. He's raised some pertinent issues there, and to that I would like to add that critics have sometimes referred to Harris's response on major policy issues as perhaps a word salad, and she's herself admitted to not being able to answer policy questions on the spot. Trump, however, we do know that he's very brazen. He's the polar opposite. My only question here is, I'm just trying to understand voter sentiment and perspectives here. Do you think that has any sort of a bearing on the pitch that she makes for herself, or the pitch that Donald Trump makes for himself?
Yeah, I'll say this, right? I think, part of, the issue that we have here in the States, especially with American-like media, is that, it's largely a world of two standards. Mm-hmm. It's the standard of infinity, where she has to give every policy detail, every plan within detail, and, his response can be something as simple as we're going to build the wall. And it's acceptable and nobody presses him on it. Let's also keep in mind, he's been running for president for almost 10 years, where she's been running for president for largely, 100 days. And within that 100 days, she's put out multiple detailed plans, when in reality, Donald Trump hasn't done anything near. Look, I'm a black man, right? I'm black in America. Mm. She actually put out a detailed plan about, how her policies would actually help the black community. Donald Trump, the only thing he's done in the last 10 years is put out a one-pager called the Platinum Plan that doesn't have any details to it. And so, while folk may think that sometimes, she gets in the word salad with things, she's actually somebody that understands the complexity of government, right? The complexity of our issues, and can actually address them. Whereas Donald Trump, we get up on stage and ramble about stolen elections, which are a lie, ramble about, researching, racial communities, and ramble about, just lying about things that, he didn't do, and he's claiming he did during his presidency. So
you're saying that she perhaps is unable to answer some of these questions because she really wants to take the time, assess the situation, and come up with a detailed plan. That's what I'm just seeking clarity.
And that's exactly what she's done.
All right.
She's put out, and this is the thing, she's put out multiple detailed plans dealing with almost every community within, the 110 odd days that she's been running for president. You got to keep in mind, he's literally been running for president 7 times longer, in this election cycle alone. And that probably number has become 21 times longer if you take into account the last 2 times he's run for president.
We hear you, Mr. Craig. Thank you so much for making the time and, taking all our questions. Of course, there are some things that go against Kamala Harris when it comes to that word salad that she has acknowledged. But at the same time, there are, of course, all the things that you mentioned, and you were definitely sticking to your guns, going right behind Harris. And we'll get to know, I think, in hours from now, what is next on the global stage, what's next for the U.S. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Eugene Craig joining us from Washington, D.C. Pleasure speaking with you.
Have a good day.